before we begin this real and disturbing story, let me invite you. Subscribe now to Dr. Investigation and turn on the notification bell. Here, you'll find true crime cases that shock the world, detailed investigations, dark secrets, and twists that leave anyone speechless. Now, picture this: a seemingly perfect family living in a luxurious mansion in Miami, a successful couple of attorneys, respected by the entire community, children who completed the portrait of prosperity and the dream life. But behind that facade, hidden tensions, buried resentments, and choices were building. Choices that would lead to a night of pure horror. On an August night in 2004, the Sutton family's life changed forever. Susan Sutton was shot and killed inside her home. Her husband, John Sutton, was also targeted and left for dead, but he survived, carrying irreversible consequences. The most disturbing detail? Evidence soon suggested that the person responsible wasn't a stranger nor a distant enemy, but someone within the family itself. This isn't just a story of a brutal crime. It's the portrait of how secrets, betrayals, and the thirst for control can destroy even the most sacred bond, that between father and son. And throughout this video, you'll uncover every detail of one of the most shocking cases in recent American history, the Sutton case. Get ready, because what you're about to hear may change the way you look at the word family. To understand the scale of this tragedy, we need to go back to the beginning. Who were the Suttons? John Sutton was a well-known attorney in Miami. Ambitious, determined, and highly successful, he built his reputation through hard work and discipline, becoming a respected figure in the courtroom. His career brought him not only prestige, but also a life of privilege, wealth, and influence. At his side was Susan Sutton, often described as the heart of the family, charismatic, active in the community, and devoted to her children. Susan balanced John's strict demeanor with warmth and care. Together, they represented what many considered a true power couple. Their home was a grand mansion located in one of the most desirable areas of the city, a symbol of stability and prosperity. It hosted parties, social gatherings, and events that reinforced the image of a successful family admired by everyone. But behind the walls of that mansion, things were not as flawless as they appeared. Christopher, the couple's biological son, grew up surrounded by privilege but also heavy expectations. From a young age, he showed signs of rebellion, struggled to follow rules, and maintained a complicated relationship with his parents. Frequent conflicts, growing resentment, and increasingly distant behavior created a silent rift between him and the rest of the family. In contrast, Melissa, the adopted daughter, seemed to follow a completely different path. She was close to Susan, sought harmony, and distanced herself from her brother's troubling behavior. To outsiders, Melissa and Christopher looked like just two children living in a prosperous home, but behind closed doors, tension was building. And here lies a crucial point. Family secrets rarely stay hidden forever. The cracks forming inside that household would later trigger a chain of events capable of turning what seemed like a perfect home into the setting of one of Miami's most shocking tragedies. It was Sunday, August 22nd, 2004. The Suttons' mansion, located in one of Miami's most exclusive neighborhoods, looked as it always did. Silent, imposing, a symbol of success. John and Susan, after yet another ordinary day, were preparing to rest. Nothing in that evening hinted at the horror about to unfold. Shortly after midnight, the calm was shattered. An armed man entered the residence. There were no signs of a noisy break-in, no evidence of an initial struggle. The intruder seemed to know exactly where to go and what to do. He moved straight toward the master bedroom, where John and Susan Sutton were sleeping. In a matter of seconds, the place that symbolized safety and intimacy became the stage of violence. Susan Sutton was shot first. The bullet struck fatal points, leaving her no chance of defense. Beside her, John Sutton was also attacked. The shots were aimed at his head, a detail investigators would later highlight. This wasn't the mark of an impulsive crime, but a planned execution meant to leave no survivors. But the impossible happened. Gravely wounded, John did not die. Covered in blood and slipping in and out of consciousness, he was still breathing. When paramedics arrived, they found a man in critical condition, but alive, fighting for every second. His survival not only defied the logic of the attack, but would become crucial in unraveling the mystery of that night. The scene inside the mansion was disturbing. Susan's lifeless body, the brutality of the gunfire, and the fact that nothing had been taken. Money, jewelry, valuables, all untouched. There were no signs of a chaotic robbery or a rushed escape. For investigators, the message was clear. This was no burglary. It was a carefully planned ambush. As the news spread, neighbors and friends were left in shock. How could anyone have chosen the Suttons as targets? They were respected, admired, known for their success and seemingly perfect life. If there were no declared enemies, then who could possibly want them dead? From that moment, the investigation would dive into a web of secrets, betrayals, and revelations that turned this tragedy into one of Florida's most infamous cases. The attack wasn't just brutal. It carried a signature, the mark of someone who knew the Suttons intimately. The attack on the Suttons carried every mark of a calculated execution. There were no signs of robbery, no rush, no improvisation. The investigation had to begin with the central question: who had a real motive to want the couple dead? The first name to surface shocked everyone. Teddy Montato, John Sutton's law partner and longtime friend of the family. Teddy was well known for his closeness to the Suttons. He often visited their home and was treated almost like part of the inner circle. But behind that friendship lay an explosive secret. He was having an affair with Susan Sutton. Suddenly, the narrative seemed to make sense. The lover hidden in silence, the business partner who could benefit from John's absence, the man with privileged access to the house. For investigators, it looked like the perfect setup for a crime of passion, and one with opportunity. The local press wasted no time. Headlines painted Teddy as the central figure in a fatal triangle. The idea that the partner and lover could have orchestrated everything fueled public opinion. After all, how many crimes have begun exactly this way? Passion, betrayal, and violence? But as the evidence was tested, the theory collapsed. Teddy presented an unshakable alibi. On the night of the crime, he was at a busy restaurant, surrounded by witnesses who confirmed his presence. Ballistics tests also revealed that the weapon used had no connection to him. What seemed like a perfect storyline was, in truth, a false lead. With that hypothesis eliminated, detectives faced an uncomfortable truth. They were dealing with a crime that required intimate knowledge of the Suttons' lives. The killer knew exactly where to find the couple, the right moment to strike, and how to act without leaving the traces of a common burglary. This wasn't the work of a random outsider. Meanwhile, John Sutton fought for his life in a hospital, blind, debilitated, but still alive. And as investigators dug deeper, they were forced to look where no one wanted to, the cracks within the family itself. And it was there, behind the mansion's doors, that the most disturbing clues of the entire investigation would emerge. As investigators turned their focus inward on the family, one name began to emerge with force: Christopher Sutton, the couple's biological son. From an early age, Christopher carried a history of conflict. He grew up surrounded by the material comfort his parents provided, but instead of embodying the image of a privileged child, he displayed behavior that became increasingly difficult to control. As a teenager, the problems escalated. Defiance, rejection of authority, and a relationship marked by constant clashes with John and Susan. The breaking point came when his parents, exhausted and desperate, made a life-changing decision. They sent Christopher to a boarding school for troubled youth. For John and Susan, it was a last attempt to save their son's future. For Christopher, it was nothing less than betrayal. That resentment never faded. Instead, it grew in silence, fueling an ever deeper emotional distance between him and his parents. Friends later revealed that Christopher often spoke about his anger, how he felt rejected, misunderstood, and abandoned. He never forgave John and Susan for sending him away. While Melissa, the adopted daughter, sought stability and remained close to Susan, Christopher moved in the opposite direction. Rather than repairing his family bonds, he surrounded himself with risky relationships, questionable friendships, and behaviors that reinforced a sense of rebellion. For detectives, this past began to sound like more than just youthful missteps. The tension, the resentment, the festering anger, these could all be the key to understanding the brutality of the crime. After all, who better than a son fueled by rage to know every detail of his parents' routines, every vulnerability of the house, every perfect moment to strike? The name Christopher Sutton, once just an uncomfortable shadow in the background, was now becoming central to the investigation. And what would surface next made one thing clear. This wasn't just a family dispute. It was a deep-rooted hatred, powerful enough to end in tragedy. As investigators dug deeper into Christopher Sutton's life, a new figure entered the spotlight: Garrett Kopp. Young, immersed in drugs, and surrounded by bad influences, Garrett was far from a stranger to Christopher. In fact, the two shared a relationship marked by frequent phone calls and suspicious meetings in the days leading up to the crime. It was this very pattern that caught the investigators' attention. Just hours before the attack on the Suttons, phone records showed multiple calls between Christopher and Garrett. These weren't casual conversations. They carried intensity, urgency, and timing that aligned dangerously with the night of the execution. Not long after the crime, Garrett was arrested for an unrelated assault. During that detention, investigators uncovered a crucial piece of evidence. The weapon in the possession matched the caliber used in the attack on John and Susan Sutton. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. When confronted, Garrett eventually broke. He admitted to being the shooter, but refused to shoulder full responsibility. In his account, Christopher Sutton had pressured and manipulated him. According to Garrett, Christopher was a mastermind, promising favors, hinting at drug-related debts, and laying out a plan in which Garrett was merely the trigger man, a pawn in a much larger conspiracy. That confession reshaped the entire case. For the first time, investigators had a concrete link tying Christopher to the crime. This was no longer just about old resentments or family tensions. There was a weapon, a confession, and a named accomplice. From that moment, the story was undeniable. John and Susan Sutton were not the victims of a random burglary. The attack had been orchestrated, and all the evidence pointed to their own son at the center of the plot. The name Garrett Kopp became critical, not only as the man who pulled the trigger, but as a voice that confirmed investigators' darkest suspicion. The conspiracy had come from within the Sutton family itself. With Garrett Kopp's revelations and Christopher Sutton's troubled past, the case finally reached the courtroom. What had once seemed like a tragedy without clear suspects was now a trial filled with tension, drama, and unbearable pain. At the center stood Christopher Sutton, accused of orchestrating the execution of his own mother and the attempted murder of his father. Beside him, as the prosecution's key witness, was Garrett Kopp, the man who had pulled the trigger and now testified against the person he claimed was the true mastermind. The courtroom became a stage of raw emotion. Every testimony exposed the depth of the wounds carved into the Sutton family. John Sutton, debilitated and blinded by the attack, appeared to deliver his testimony. The image was heartbreaking. A father, widowed and scarred, pointed his own son as the one responsible for destroying their family. The prosecution built a strong case. They presented phone records, ballistic evidence, Garrett's confession, and above all, Christopher's long-standing resentment toward his parents. Their argument was clear. Christopher had never forgiven John and Susan for sending him away to reform school, and years later, he turned that anger into a deadly act of revenge. The defense tried to dismantle Garrett's credibility, painting him as a drug addict who acted alone in search of money and drugs. They portrayed Christopher as a scapegoat, unfairly targeted. But the weight of the evidence was undeniable. Despite Garrett's contradictions, the threads connecting Christopher to the crime were too strong to ignore. When the verdict was read, silence fell over the courtroom. Christopher Sutton was convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder of his father. His sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Garrett Kopp also received his punishment, but the heavier shadow fell over Christopher. Not just the decades behind bars, but the eternal stigma of being branded the son who ordered the murder of his own mother. The trial left scars that would never heal. Melissa, the adopted daughter, severed all ties with Christopher. For John Sutton, fate was even more merciless. Beyond losing his wife and living with permanent injuries, he now had to face the reality that his own son had plotted against him. In that courtroom, it wasn't just one man who was sentenced. An entire family watched his legacy collapse under the weight of betrayal, tragedy, and justice. The Sutton case would not only be remembered for its brutality, but for the chilling reality that the sacred bond between father and son had been shattered forever. The trial was over, but the scars left by the Sutton case were far from healed. For John Sutton, life would never be the same. He survived a brutal attack, but lost his vision, his wife, and, symbolically, his son. Sentenced to life in prison, Christopher was no longer just a rebellious heir. He was now the man convicted of orchestrating the murder of his own mother. John moved forward in the only way he could, by trying to rebuild what was left. He learned to live in darkness, relearned daily routines without sight, and even tried to return his law career with the help of colleagues and assistants. But nothing could fill the void left by Susan, nor erase the shadow of a son who betrayed him in the cruelest way imaginable. For Melissa, the adopted daughter, the outcome was equally devastating. She not only lost her mother and saw her father permanently scarred, but also had to cut all ties with Christopher. The brother who should have shared her grief became, for her, the very symbol of hatred and destruction. The Miami community, which once saw the Suttons as a model of success and stability, was left in shock. The case exposed an unsettling truth. Behind seemingly perfect facades, there could be secrets capable of exploding into unimaginable violence. And perhaps that is the most disturbing aspect of the Sutton case. It is not only the story of a crime, but the complete dismantling of what a family is supposed to represent. A husband who survived but lost everything. A daughter who watched her brother turn into an enemy. And a mother whose life was stolen in her own home, the very place where she should have been safest. The Sutton case did not end with Christopher's sentencing. It lives on in memory, as a dark reminder of how far anger, vengeance, and buried family secrets can go inside what looks, from the outside, like a perfect home. The Sutton case is more than a brutal crime. It is a reminder of how blood ties, meant to represent love and protection, can instead become a source of destruction. A family that seemed to have it all, success, prestige, stability, was consumed by resentment, betrayal, and long-buried secrets. Susan lost her life in the one place she should have been safest, inside her own home. John survived, but carries forever the physical and emotional scars of a night that took his wife and revealed the darkest side of his own son. Melissa watched her family collapse before her eyes, losing her mother, her brother, and the life she once knew. And perhaps the most haunting question is this: how can hatred grow so deep that it turns a son into an enemy? How far can vengeance corrode the very essence of family? The Sutton case forces us to look beyond the crime itself. It makes us reflect on the fragility of human relationships, on the weight of choices, and on how secrets can silently grow until they explode into devastation. Now I want to hear from you. Backhand index pointing right, do you believe Christopher Sutton was truly the cold, calculating mastermind behind this crime? Or could Garrett Kopp have acted on his own interests and dragged Christopher into the blame? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Every perspective adds to the discussion. And don't forget, if this story impacted you, like this video, subscribe to Dr. Investigation and turn on the notification bell. Here, you'll always find real stories that expose the darkest corners of a human mind. Because, in the end, sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from outside. It's born within the home.